Okay. Hey guys. Okay, Freilach. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Hey. We started the sugya, right? That Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel says that Soichek Adam Eshkol Shalanovim Loteicha Kedeira, that you can squeeze a cluster of grapes, which is commonly planted for its juice, if the juice is going directly into a pot, meaning if it's going directly into food, but not into a bowl. That's how we began yesterday. In other words, if something is being extracted from a fruit, even though it looks like liquid, but if it's going directly into food, it has a status of food, and the definition of mefarek, which is extracting, which is told in the dash, right? What was a dash? That you take one type from another type. The kernel is food. The klipa, from which you extracted it from, is not food. So it has to be two types. So liquid from food, that's called mefarek. Food from food is eating, food from food. Now we're going to continue to learn a lot more on this topic. First of all, we're going to see that perhaps this is a machlekes tanoim, but we're going to have other limitations or qualifications to mefarek. For example, what happens if you are extracting liquid from a fruit, but you're doing it straight to the garbage? It's called mashke habali ibud, or other scenarios where it's going to get ruined. There is also a svara to say, since it's habali ibud, it doesn't have the definition of mashke, and if it doesn't have the definition of mashke, then you will be allowed to do it. We're going to be learning another concept regarding mefarek. What happens if the liquid that's in the fruit did not originate in the fruit? So, for example, boiled vegetables. It didn't have liquid to begin with, but now that you boiled it, so the water went into it. Are you allowed to squeeze that? Now we're going to learn pratim, where there's going to be a three-way machlekes, Rav, Shmuel, Rabbi Yechanan, but we're going to have a svara to say that if the mashke did not originate from within it, then you are allowed to extract it. And obviously the question will be, according to that shita, what, can you squeeze out a shmata? Even though the liquid did not originate from within it, we're going to be touching upon these points and a lot more. On Amid Beis, we're going to be introducing the Bishul Achar Bishul Sugya, which is phenomenal, even though here in the Gemara it takes up a relatively small amount of space. And finally, we're going to be learning 4 questions that were asked between 2 Amirayim, one from the other, when they were sitting in front of Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan was, so to say, dozing. It's very interesting. So they were having a conversation, and Rabbi Yechanan, while he was dozing, overheard the answers, and it's going to be a beautiful piece of Agadita, and he gave his own answers to these 4 questions and a lot more. We left off on Daf Kuf Mem Dalid Amid Beis by the bottom of the Amid, Mamish by the last line, excuse me, Masav Ravina. And again, all of this is based on Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, that Soichek Adam Eshkol Shalanovim Loteicha Kedeira Aval Loteicha Ka'aram. In other words, if it's going directly into food, it doesn't have the status of a mashke, it has the status of a food, and we're going to try to challenge it again. Now, the first challenge that we learned yesterday was quoting a Mishnah in Mikvahs, and now we're going to continue quoting from the same Mishnah. Masad Ravina. The Hemshech to the Mishnah in Taharis, it says that if you have a Tamei Meis, Shesachat Zeisim Ba'anavim, someone who's Tamei Meis, status of an Av, he's squeezing Zeisim and Anavim. For sure, he renders the Zeisim and Anavim Tamei, but he's squeezing it in a way where he's only touching the food, the olive, the grape. He's not touching the liquid that's leaving them. So says the Mishnah, that if you're starting out, the olive and the grape to begin with are exactly the size of an egg. What's the magic to the size of the egg? We know that in order for food to be able to be mitame mitashva, to impart tuma to something that the food is in touch with, right? The mitame has to have the size at least of a kibbutz. So if to begin with, before you began to squeeze it, it had the size of exactly an egg. In other words, the moment you began to get liquid out of the olive or out of the grape, obviously the olive and the grape became a little bit smaller. Since this person is not touching the liquids directly, so says the Mishnah, tar. Tar means that the juice is going to be tar. Okay, end of quote. So says the Gemara, what does that imply? But if the olive and the grape is even just a little bit bigger than a kibetza, which means that the moment you begin to squeeze it out, what do you have? Even though you already have juice leaving it, the olive and the grape still have a size of a betza. That means that they're going to be tummy. Now, the Mishnah did not differentiate, was not machalik, whether you're squeezing it into a bowl or into a bottle, or whether you're squeezing it directly into food, implying that no matter what, the liquid will become tummy. But why? Why will the liquid become tummy? Based on the same kasha we had before. If you're squeezing it directly into food, and you're telling me that it has a status of food, and mashkin doesn't have to become muksher to become tummy. Mashkin is mashkin. But if it's food, the rule is that food does first have to become wetted with all the details, for it to become tummy. How was this liquid wetted to become tummy? It wasn't. The has the status of an oichel, so b'ma is kasher. Now the Mishnah never said that if you're putting it into food, it becomes tummy, but the Mishnah did not differentiate. So it says the Gemara, no, that who ma'isiv lavu hu must be indeed that what is the case of the Mishnah? Only b'seichek l'teicha ka'ara. By the way, ka'ara doesn't have to mean only a bowl. But when you squeeze olives and grapes, you're squeezing it inside of a vat, you're squeezing it inside of a bottle. So that's the norm. And taka there, it's going to have a din of mashkin. Mashkin doesn't have to become muksher. But if you would be squeezing it into food, taka, it would not become tamei, even though the originator of the source of the tuma, the anavim and the zeisim themselves, would have the size of a kazais. Okay. So not only did we not refute shlag up this svara, but the Gemara is going to suggest that maybe this din, right, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Shmuel, is maybe a machlokes tanoim. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, perhaps ketanoi. Where do we have this? So now we're quoting a Mishnah in Maisres Halkop. Says in the Mishnah, Hamachlik ba'anovim. Look at this. We're speaking about a baker, and he is smearing his pastries or his bread with grapes. And why is that? You know, today, right, when we make challah, when we see our bnei bayis making challah, so we smear it with eggs. There are certain there are certain items that are put on the periphery of the loaves to make them shiny. So people used to use olives. So says the Mishnah in Maisres, lo yuchshar, the bread, and Ashinoch adds, and the olives, neither of them became muksher. Why did it not become muksher? Now we're going to see that in a moment. But it should become muksher because you're taking liquid out of it, right? And you're putting it onto food. The only reason would be is because you're rubbing the grape directly on the challah. So therefore it doesn't have a status of mashkin, which is great. However, the Yehuda says, yeah, muksher. And again, I'm sorry, my love that Mar Savar, meaning the Tanakama holds that since this is taka the source, this might be the source of Shmuel, and therefore it cannot be machshir, it's not liquid. However, Mar Savar, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the lav oichelu, it's normal liquid. And L'chayda Taka, that's the machlokes. So Rav Papa says no. That the Kula Alma, I'll tell you from this Mishnah, Mashka Bala Oichel, Lav Oichelu. Shmuel cannot lean on this Mishnah at all. Why would the Tanach hold that not the challah nor the grape themselves became mukher? Because for Mashka Bala Ibud Kamifligi, another concept. Here, this juice is going to be heated in the oven and it's going to evaporate. Right? You don't want the juice itself. It's being used as a shmirach. So it's called mashka bala ibud. Maybe mashka bala ibud doesn't have a din of mashka. That mar savar, meaning the second time that Rabbi Yehuda holds mashkahu, or mar savar, no, that lav mashkahu, which is why lo hukshet. And if that, says Rav Papa, is the machlokes here in the Mishnah, in machshirin, maisris, so then it will pluk to the hani tanoid, it's going to fit with the following brayso. So guys, how to Rav Papa? So Rav Papa is taking the Mishnah Maisres and he's linking it now to this Bryce. What's the Bryce of the Tanya? Hamifatseya b'zeisim b'yodayim misoyavois. If a person has hands that are tamei, the tumah midrabanan, known as yodayim misoyavois, which is that if you don't wash them with negovaser, stam yodayim ashniyos, and if you're handling tumah Maisres, you're going to make them into a shlishi. And if you're handling chveis kachim, it's even worse. You're going to make them into a shlishi as well. So here, in order for you to make this zaysin, now hamafatseya means that there are certain times that it's called bruising the olives. Bruising the olives could cause some juice to ooze out of the olives. People used to bruise the olives in order to make the olives be sweeter. So they would bruise it, they would break it. So I'm going to say it says the Tana in the Braisa, Hukshar, because since when you bruise them, some drops go out, and you wanted them to go out, okay, you're pleased that they came out. It's not that you want to drink them, but they are affecting the olives to become sweeter. So therefore, Hukshar, they became susceptible, and therefore, since your hands are misuavos, the olives became tummy. However, if l'soif son b'melach, there's another reason why you would bruise, and that's not because you want any oil to leave them, which is like a beneficial for the texture of the olive. But here, you want to salt the olives. And in order for the salt to properly adhere to the zaysim, they needed to be a little bit broken. There, you don't want for any of the juices to leave. So even if they left, lo yokshar. Okay, and the third case in the Braisa, Leida imigiu zeis of limsoik oilav. If you want to know whether you can already harvest, right, these olives or not, you want to know whether they're hard or not. So they're on the tree, but you're knocking them with a stick, and somehow you're going to feel whether they're ready or not. Here also, you don't want any of the juices to go out, so leihosha. Says Rabbi Yehuda on the last case, that even if you only lay the imhigio zeis of limsoik hukshar, then the olives will become hukshar if some liquid left them. And what's the machlokes? So my love, all this is Rav Papa, the same machlokes. The mar savar mashka habala ibud mashkahu. All right, and that's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Umar savar, the Tanach holds that no, the lav mashkahu. And the Gemara says, you're right. For sure in the Braisa, the machlokes, whether it's hukshad or not, has to do with mashka bali ibud, whether it's mashka or not. However, that's lav dafke, the reason over there in the Mishnah on Maisre. So Rabbi Yeshua, he's telling this to Rav Papa, you are right indeed. This Braisa that you just quoted, however, when it comes to the Mishnah Maisres, again, we're not lav dafke. This is the machlokes Tanoim connected to Shmuel. We still agree with that. But v'hanoch Tanoi b'mashka ha'omed l'tzach tzachoi komifligi gavaldik. And as Rashi says that even if we're gonna say that mashke that's going directly onto food, every Tana will hold it as a din of mashke. Everyone will hold of that. No one will hold like Shmuel. Over here, you can't say it's going to waste. It's not going to waste. Going to waste is you don't want it. It's going to get lost. Here you're smearing the bread with it. It's somewhere in between. So perhaps, right, that so perhaps this has a din of mashke. Look inside the Rashi, divrei hamaschal hanach tanoi. It's more or less a little bit towards the second half of the Amid in Rashi. The inami mashke abala oichel. Everyone will hold mashke. Says the Rashi, hanamili heicha the chosadeflei. Inami shatar beirifta. You are going to end up consuming it as a drink. Guys, don't forget that if you put, let's say we said the lemon inside the fish, I know you're eating the fish, but you are enjoying the moisture of the lemon. You're not drinking it out of a cup. It's mashke because there's liquid there. It moistened up the food. Here, when you're smearing it on top of a bread, it's not even remaining mashke. Think about it. It just looks shiny. So it's not getting lost, but it's not going to be consumed. When you're going to eat it, it's not going to taste like liquid. It's going to be part of the challah. It's going to be the shiny crust of the challah. And that's why it might not have a din of mashke. Bottom line is that we accept that the machlokes lav dafka is connected to Shmuel. Adarab, according to this, neither Tana subscribes to the concept that if mashke goes into food, it has a din of oichel. Nevertheless, says the Gemara, Amar B'Zera, Amar B'Chia Barashi, Amar Rav, also in agreement to Shmuel, that soichik adam eshkol shalanav lo toicha kadeira, because then it has a din of oichel. It's going into oichel, it has a din of oichel. And here, in the name of Rav, quoting another din, that the dog, litziroi, what happens if you're squeezing out a fish for its brine, even if it's going into a bowl, it's going into a keli, it's not going out to food. Fish brine, according to Rav, has a din of oichel. And b'meila the same concept, that oichel, ma'oichel, is never going to be called mefarik. Says the Gemara, Yosef Rav Dima, and v'ka'amalo hashmaitza in the name of Rav. So Amalei Abayel Rav Dimi, oh, this is great. I'm happy that you're repeating this din of the dog, that the seed of a dog has a din of oichel in the name of Rav, because since Atun Mishmei Rav Masnison, ubemeila v'lei kashaluchum, you're not going to have a challenge because we never heard from Rav otherwise. However, Anan, the problem with us is that we who began the sugya quoting Shmuel, who says that food that goes into food is food. But juices that go into food is food. But juices, you squeeze a grape into a keli as a din of mashkin. We heard that Shmuel was the one that added the din with the fish. Anan mishmei Shmuel masnin alon ubemeila v'kashalon, because we know that Shmuel at another time did not say that din regarding the fish. That me Amar Shmuel dag letzili afil otecha ka'ara itmer. And now we are starting, right, the final three-way machlokes here in the Amid. Kivashim shesechatam. We're speaking about pickled vegetables, guys, not cooked vegetables. We'll speak about that in a moment. Pickled vegetables means you take raw vegetables and you pickle them either in wine or in vinegar, right? As we spoke out in the intro, the novelty here will be is that now this wine did not originate from within the vegetable, and that might be of significance. So you have these kavashim shesechatam. So Amar Rav, we see Rav, we see Shmuel and Rabbi Yechanan. And guys, we're going to have to follow here with Rashi, right? We're starting 20 or 19 lines before the bottom of the Amud and Rashi. So it depends. Legufan means you don't care about the liquid that you're squeezing out. You only want to be able to eat this pickled vegetable, and it's not good for you if it's too saturated with liquid. Look inside Rashi. Rashi begins, Legufai, im le'echol hakavashim seichakon, mimashkat sof aleim b'haniflo behemuter, lechatchila. If you want to get rid of the liquid that's in them, then lechatchila, you can squeeze them on Shabbos. Why? Zakt Rashi, the lav mefariku. Why? Because since hoyel the lav lamashka hutzar. No, it's similar to mashka habali ibud. You don't care. It's not about the liquid. It's about getting rid of the liquid from within. Okay, back and guys, keep your finger in Rashi, because there's different steps here. Mutter. If let's mayhem, no, you want that wine that was inside the vegetable. So according to Rav, it's pater avol asur. And why is it pater? Why is it not asur midoy raisa? Look inside Rashi, pater she'ein zemafarek. She'ein hamashka hazeh yoytze min hakavashim shelo yidel betoichan. Wow. Because since, where did this liquid come from? Unlike Zaysim, Anavim, Petis that we spoke about until now. Here, these vegetables did not have wine. They got filled with wine because you pickled them in wine. So since the liquid shaloy godal b'toichan midoiraisa, it's not also. And all of the achrayim say, according to the shita, would you, for example, be allowed to squeeze out a shmata by saying at least not violating a biblical violation because the liquid in the shmata did not originate in the shmata? So this is a discussion here in the Tosfos. But anyways, let's keep on learning here the Gemara. So that's step number 2. According to that, step number 3 is shalakis. Shalakis is boiled vegetables. And by boiled vegetables, bein legufan, whether you're squeezing them because the vegetables are too filled with water, or if you want their juices, Rav holds gewalt, it's mutter. And why is that? Look inside. Rashi shalakis afilu limemeim lav mashkeninu elo oichel. Interesting. Because if you boil a vegetable, we consider all of the juices that are coming out from them as oichel. By the way, this is very similar. If Rav is the one that spoke about the fish, I know that what the fish brine, das balabatim, which is hepach das toida, will say it's liquid. No, sometimes something is coming from within, right? That's what he said, that the tzir of a dag has the din of oichel. For some reason, the juices of a vegetable, the juices that came about because you cooked them a lot, have a din of oichel. Oichel from oichel is mutter lachatchil. So holds Rav. Shmuel says, let's go through all the stages. But first of all, Shmuel puts together echad kivashim, whether you have pickled vegetables, which was the first category, whether it is shalakos, which is the last category, boiled vegetables. Here, Shmuel says it depends. Again, li gufan. The gufa means you don't want the liquid, right? So then it's mutter lachatchila, like we learned in the Rashi, right? Hoyul v'lav lamashka hutzarech. If it's lemeimeyan, Shmuel says it's patal avalasa. He doesn't say by shlokos it's mutter. No, yitaka. Why is it not also d'oraisa? Because in both cases, shaloi godal b'toichan, what a heter, the liquids did not originate in it, but it's patal avalasa. Now this, you see, that will be the stira between Shmuel and Shmuel. If Shmuel is the one that said that fish brine is oichel, and therefore it's mutter, then why? And Shmuel here is saying that shalakos, if you're squeezing it limeimeyan, right, then it's also midrabanan. That's the stira, and that's like a problem. Oh, so Amalei hu Elokim, your version is wrong. Shmuel never said that. By God, Einei Ra'u v'loizar, I saw and not a stranger. In other words, mipumei de Rabbi Yirmiyah shmieli. And he heard it, Rabbi Yirmiyah heard it from Rav Zeda, and Rav Zeda heard it from Rabbi Bar Ashi, and Rabbi Bar Ashi heard it from Rav, then again the fish brine. Shmuel is not the one that said that you are allowed to squeeze out the fish brine from the fish, because taka, we are comparing fish brine to shalakos, and Rav is the one that was mated it, because he considers that juice oichel, and Shmuel doesn't. Alama, Shmuel also is made that it's not also, it's not chayiv chatos midoiraisa, because the liquids did not originate in it by the shalakos. Okay, so now that we quoted Rav and Shmuel, you should know that here there's a third amida, there's a third shita. So Gufa we learned before, kavashim shesachatam, beginning with pickled vegetables. Rav says it depended. If it's legufan, then it's mutter, like we mentioned, because since the lav lemashke hu tzarech, so therefore it's bechlal not asur. Lav lemashke hu tzarech. I just want to give you a great example. What's mefarik from? Mefarik comes from dash. What happened when they were dash? What did they want? When you trample on the ears, what are you looking for? You dafka want a kernel. You dafka want a kernel. You don't want the klipa. So therefore, if what is coming out is something that you don't need and you don't want, it's bechlal not similar. It's not shaykh. It's mutar lachatchil. Limei meyan. So remember Rav, not by shalakos, but at least by kavashim. Then he holds patal level asur. And why is it in chayev, like we learned in Nashi? Because the liquids did not originate in them. Is shalakos. Rav holds liquids leaving cooked vegetables has a din of oichel. Very good. Shmuel Amar, like we learned before, Shmuel puts together pickled and shalakos, and he holds that we make the difference, like Rav did by the kavashim, legufan muter, limeme and patalavola. So what Shmuel goes one notch lechumra, that by the shalakos he doesn't consider the liquid zoichel. He's not going to say you're going to be chayiv doiraisa, never, because shaloi gadal b'toichan. And if you don't want them, it's going to be muter, because it's machal, you don't want it. It's not like a dash. By dash you wanted the kernel. And now the third sheet, Rabbi Yechanan Amar, echad kivashim, he's very machmer. The echad shalakos, legufan, everyone is moided that if you squeeze something and you don't want the liquid, then it's muter. But the moment you want the liquid, Rabbi Yechanan doesn't subscribe to this concept that since shaloi gadal b'toicham, it's not mepharik. No, like right now, if you have a shmata and the shmata is filled with liquid, you can't squeeze it out. You can't squeeze it out. You can't say, that's no problem because the liquid did not originate in it. There's no such a thing. Very good. And not it's also midrabanan. You're chayv chatos. That's the meaning of mepharik. You're taking out a liquid from a solid. Wash it. Very good. Says the Gemara, I'm going to quote you a braisa that lechora will refute all three shittas. The good thing with the braisa is that we accept more us, so to say, making a chsura mechsera, us adding to it, and each one is going to have to add nuances to this braisa for them not to be refuted. But read the braisa, Meisvei. It says, soichakin kavashim b'Shabbos l'tzoyrech haShabbos. You are allowed to squeeze out pickled vegetables on Shabbos. Now, there's another detail that we didn't speak about, but it's a general din. I cannot work on Shabbos l'tzoyrech choil. So whatever you're doing it only because you're going to eat it on Shabbos. Which is a general rule. Zeisim va'anavim, dear loy yischoik, be'im sachak, you're going to be chayv chatos. Okay, what's the problem? This brayse never differentiated whether it is legufan, whether it is lemeimeim. It seems to imply that no matter for what reason, it's always mutter, mamish. You can squeeze always kavashim. Even the lenient opinion, right, said lemeimeim is patalavalasa. Kasha l'Rav, each one is even worse. The kasha l'Shmuel, the kasha l'Rav Yechanan. So the Gemara says no. Rav metaretz l'tamei, Shmuel metaretz l'tamei, and Rabbi Yechanan metaretz l'tamei. Rav metaretz l'tamei. When the Brisa says soichakin kavashim b'Shabbos l'tzorech haShabbos avoloi l'matzoi Shabbos, what is the Brisa talking to? Obviously, it's mutter. That's only if you're squeezing it, not because you want the liquids, but you want to eat the vegetable, right? But it is legufan. And indeed, since it's not like the kernel, though, if lav lamashka utzarech, it's mutter. Avo lemeimeim, guys, this is according to Rav, then it's going to be by the kavashim pater lavolasud, and according to Rav, by the shalaka is the most lenient. He considers those liquids food, right? Like Rav considers the tzir of fish food, it's going to be always mutter. Bein legufan, bein lemeim mutter. V'zeisim va'anavim, lo yischoik, be'im sachakon, you're going to be chayv chatas. Shmuel mataris l'tamei, Nachamal quoting the beginning of the Braisa, that soichatin kivashim b'Shabbos l'tzoyrech haShabbos, and according to Shmuel, who adin l'shlakos, both of them are mutter, but when, if you don't want the liquids at all, and therefore it's not like the kernel, mutter lachatchila, you're only squeezing it out because those vegetables cannot be eaten because they're too filled with liquid. And then the Braisa goes weiter, then that's clear according to everyone, and then Sachat Yerbi Chayv Chatos, and Rabbi Yechanan Tanis Latame is the most machmer. When the Braisa says Soichakin Kavashim L'Tzoyrech Shabbos, Avaloy L'Metzoy Shabbos. True, this is both by Kavashim, pickled vegetables, or shalakos or cooked vegetables. However, this is the most common opinion. Everyone is minded that if you are squeezing something whose liquids did not originate in them, and you don't want those liquids, you just want to eat the object, then leguf muter. Aval lemeimeim l'Rabbi Yechanan, it's chayv chatos. Aval lemeimeim l'yischoik. And vim sachat nase kemi shesachat zeisem v'anovim, and you are chayv chatos. In other words, even if it absorbed lachluchias from someone else, it becomes part of it, so to say. And now squeezing it out, this achsidish work. In other words, even as we need to be invited back to be getting inspiration from our chavir, from a rebbe. So it's not mine, emes, but it becomes mine. It becomes mine. Once it becomes mine, then it's its juice. If you squeeze it out, then that's a bona fide act of mefarek, and your chayv chatas as is by zeisem and anov. Okay. Omar Rab Chia Barashi Omar Rab. We quoted this when we began the sugya. I want you to know that Dvar Torah, when we're speaking about squeezing, that Einoi Chayev Elo Al Grisas Zeisim Va'anavim Bulvat. And like Rashi writes, we already quoted the Rashi right all the way in the bottom over here. Was like Rashi, because by all other fruits and vegetables in the times of Chazal, he considers squeezing them for the juices something not that usual. Lav or chayu. Guys, I know that we learned in the Mishnah the 3 categories. I'm just saying this shita will hold that the oiraisa, only something that's grown for its juices, there do you say that squeezing them is a bona fide act of schita. Now, many places can say that, like we mentioned, I think Tropicana orange juice, that we're living in a different society. And many people, because of these diets, whether they work or not, they're juicers. It's a different world. But in the times of Chazal, according at least to this shita, that midoiraisa, if something is generally not used for its juices, even though you're squeezing it for its juice, since it's not usual, it automatically goes into the general heter of shaloi kedarkoi, or here, lav or chayu. Lav or chayu always brings it down a notch from an isur deraisa to an isur derabban. Now, once we quoted this statement, first of all, it's not only Rav, but the Chen Tana de Menashe, which is even better. In other words, we have, even though Rav Tanahu, but in the Yeshiva of Menashe, they had such a braisa. That what? But once we quote the braisa of the Dei Menashe, we're quoting a different inyan that he also that braisa put together, and that is ve'ein eid mipei eid kasher, turning chavra to daf kufa ham base ella le'edus isha milvad. A huge statement, guys. Look inside the top Rashi. All right, we're going to learn this a lot when we start Nashim with the help of Hashem. 8 is, I'm saying that not that I saw, but I heard from someone else. Oh, that can only, I think that's called hearsay in English. You know, I did not see. Is that valid? So this version it's valid only for one issue. And that is that if a woman's husband traveled and he did not return and she's an aguna, comes along one witness and says that I heard from someone else that the husband passed away, we are very lenient, not keep her into a status of aguna. Based on that, she can get married. Look inside the top Rashi, that loyne, leisha, meis bailech. How can you trust an eid mipi eid? The akilu barabanan, mishu miguna. Now, guys, very nice. You have Rachmana, she's an aguna, but how does it work? If Eidus means I saw something, if I didn't see it, I'm not an aid. So it's very nice to want to help, but if you can't, you can't. So Rashi introduces over here, guys, let's remember this when we're going to learn this later in Yevamis and further in Nashim, because since the call, the Mekadesh, adapted the Rabbanan Mekadesh, wow, it's based on this. Really, Eid Mipi Eid should be worthless. But because when we do Kedushin, we say Kedas Moshe Yisrael, so therefore, this is the big topic, which is very rarely used, which we may never use on our own. Even today, we careful to use this instrument, and we only use it when we find in Chazal. So they're saying that if someone disappears and there comes an 8 and he says that Meis Bailech, and we're going to have in Yevamis and later in Gittin and Kedushin, the Lashon there's another Lashon. That remember Daniel says Lashon. What happens if the husband returns? The husband returns, then she has to get divorced from the first husband and from the second husband. So Chazal said that there's another statement that since we're going to be very machmar on her at the end, so we're very lenient on her in the beginning. Rashi is not contradicting that. Rashi is just explaining how does it work. It works based on the concept of Afkin Rabbanan Likidushin Mineh. Okay, that was the second statement that we have from the Tana Devei Menashe, and we're going to have a problem with that. You buy the ass in the yeshiva, Eid Mipi Eid, Eidus Bachar, and all the time. Right, a Bachar, has to be given to a kohen, even now. And not more than that, a kohen really has to take that animal to the Beis Hamikdash. It's kosher. If the Bechor gets a mum, now the Kedusha leaves it. Now it's property of the kohen and he gets to eat it. Has to have a blemish. If a kohen comes with his animal and he shows it to the expert with a blemish, it's not good enough. Why? Because we suspect that the kohen blemished the animal himself, because he's negevadavar. So at a certain point, we established that a kohen has to bring a witness to testify that that blemish happened not through me, not through the kohen. So the question is, for that testimony, do we accept Eid Mipi Eid? Now again, we began the sugi by saying that Eid Mipi Eid is never good. The Braisa says it's only good Elul Eidus Isha. But when they had this discussion in the yeshiva, not so simple. There was a machlekes hamiroi. Rav Ami taka aser. We don't accept the Eid Mipi Eid. But Rav Asi a shari. So the moment Rav Asi was lenient, so Rav Ami recalled this Tana of Bnei Menashe, which is Gavaldik. Amalei Rav Asi, but Tana of Bnei Menashe ain't Eid Mipi Eid kosher elo leEidus Isha mulvad. And according to you, it's not only for Eidus Isha, it's also good to establish that the blemish happened not through the kohen. So says the Gemara that he had a different version in this Braisa. Not elo leEidus Isha. He said that ain't Eid Mipi Eid kosher elo leEidus shehaisha ksheira mulvad. You know, to say the words, we say a woman halachically is not a kosher witness. That's not a correct statement. In many cases, she's not a kosher witness. In many cases, she's believed as a witness. As a witness, like for example, let's go to the din of an aguna. If a woman says to her chaver, your husband I saw died, meis bailech, she's believed. So the Menashe is saying wherever the Torah gave nemanus for a woman to be a witness, their Eid Mipi Eid is like Eidus Isha. So it's not only for Eidus Isha, no. And according to that, it doesn't exclude the Eid Mipi Eid being valid in other areas. In fact, according to him, a woman can say that I saw this blemish happen. Your behemoth was running under the thorn bush and it got a blemish. And she'll be believed. Since she'll be believed, right? Eid Echad Nemen Bisurin. No, Eid Echad Nemen Bisurin is also a woman. Eid. So wherever a woman will be believed, so will be Eid Mipi Eid. Okay, very good. Says the Gemara.
Rabbi, could you please explain the concept that the Rashi Vavkreid Abanon LeKedushim Minei? The top Rashi.
Okay, Avkreid Abanon LeKedushim Minei. Tzemach sounds, and not it sounds. It's a tremendous koyach that Chachamim have. Since when a man gives kedushim to a woman, he doesn't say Hariyat Mikudeshesli. He says Hariyat Mikudeshesli b'tabazu kedas Moshe v'Yisrael. His linking the Kedushin to Kedas Moshe Yisrael means that if at a later point the Moshe Yisrael say we don't want the marriage to happen, they can retroactively take away the Kedushin. And that's the people that are not yet into the Yiddish Messiah, which is so they're learned, but they're not learned enough. They don't know how it works. We can't make up new systems. Many of them argue that any time a woman today is stuck without a get, why don't we do a Afkinu Rabbanan L'Kedushim Minei? So that's the big topic. And that's why I'm saying that we only do it whenever Chazal did it. And here, according to this Rashi, the nemanus of an Eid Mipi Eid by Meis Bailech is based on that. It's an Afkinu Rabbanan L'Kedushim Minei, which is not so simple because according to this, we're going to speak about this in Yavanis and later.
So basically, they approved it. They approved it so they could annul it. Is that what you're saying?
By the marriage. But what did we learn? We're going to learn that if the husband shows up, then she's asura to the new one and to the old one. The question is, according to Rashi, right? Why would she be asur? Because according to this, she was never a married woman. She should be allowed to stay with the second husband, and she should not even need a get from the first one. No one says that. It's not so far. This is a big Rashi. This and it's an here in Shabbos and Kuf Mem Hey. But but it's here. And we'll deal with it, God willing, when we get to it, we'll deal with this Rashi. Coming back. It's late, but it's an easy yom. Now, he was machshir, and he was a lot so happy that you are Yemar Shari Bukhra. So what? Says the Gemara, okay, let's hop on. We got to move. In the Mishnah, Kuf Mem Gimel Amud Beis. At the end of the Mishnah, we spoke about honeycombs that were cut up, chopped up from before Shabbos. Now, honeycombs that are chopped, oil oozes out of them automatically. So there, the Chachamim still were machmer. But Rabbi Lazar, that's the year.
Not oil, honey, no? Honey.
Honey, thank you for correcting me. I need some more coffee. That honey, thank you. Honey oozes out automatically. And Rabbi Lazar therefore is matter. So says the Gemara, Ki Asa Rabbi Hoishi Amenarda, Asa Va'isa, he came and he brought up Baraisa that no one knew beforehand. Vashteit in the Baraisa, Zaysin Ba'anavim Shiriskam Erev Shabbos. Similar, not honeycombs. The Baraisa is speaking about olives and grapes that were already bruised or they were already cut from before Shabbos. And that allows juices to ooze automatically. Still, the Chachamim hold it's Asur, and Rabbi Lazar, which is our Mishnah, and Rab Shimon, a new Tana, is Matir. So when they heard the Braisa, the first reaction was, ooh, now that we have the new Braisa, what's the Chiddush? Not only Rabbi Lazar, also Rab Shimon. So Amar Rabbi Yosef, oh, Gavra Yisiros also Lashminam. That's the novelty. It's good to have this Braisa because now we know that Rab Shimon agrees to Rabbi Lazar. Says the Gemara, no, we know much more than that. The case of the Braisa has a much bigger Chiddush than the case of our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is speaking about honeycombs with honey. And let me just say it by heart. Honey, when it's in the honeycomb and when it's out of the honeycomb, is the same texture. Doesn't change at all. Oil and wine, right? Mifkat pkidei, mivla b'liye, it's changing it when you're taking it out. It's a worse act of schita. So it's not just that Rabbi Shimon holds to Rabbi Lazar. Even Rabbi Lazar himself, without the Braisa, we would not apply Rabbi Lazar from our Mishnah to the case of the olives and the grapes. If we only would have had access to the Mishnah Hava, meaning we erroneously would have said, Hassan, why does Rabbi Lazar allow you to have the honey that oozes out of the chopped up prior Shabbos chopped up honeycombs? The meikara uchla b'seif uchla. Uchla doesn't mean oichel, not mashkin. That's not the point. Uchla means that it doesn't change. It's not. You're not changing anything, which is why you don't need to squeeze it. It taka oozes out. So therefore, like we learned in the Rashi, no one is going to squeeze it. It goes up by itself. But over here, even when you chop up olives and grapes, you cut an olive and a grape. How much liquid will come out? Not that much. For you to really get out the liquids, you have to squeeze it because you're changing it. But over here, the mikara, it's absorbed, it's part of the food. After you squeeze it, it's like a mashka. So therefore, there is a greater fear that if you can have the liquids that oozed out, you might squeeze it yourself. And there you're doing a greater act of schita. Still, that's the chiddush of the Braisa that we compare. Since prior to Shabbos, it was already cut up, Rabbi Lazar will say the same din. And we also have a Gavra Yeseda, which is the shita of Rab Shimon. Gavra, let's go run. There's a good jog over here. Now, imagine, Kuf Mem Heya with Beis, Bishul Achar Bishul. And not that much, but here it is. Says the Holy Mishnah. Kol Shabbat B'chamin Me'erev Shabbos. Kol Shabbat B'chamin Taichas Rashi. Anything that was placed in water, you know what that means? Something that was already cooked from before Shabbos. Says the Mishnah, Shoirin Oisa B'chamin, you can soak it in water on Shabbos. Now, the item that was cooked, that benefits from it being soaked more, is when you're trying to make a broth, as we'll see in a moment. Because if you have chicken soup, right, so it's good chicken soup, but if you keep on cooking the chicken in the chicken soup, the food itself will dissolve and it will become part of the soup, and that is an added benefit. You are allowed to do that. You can do that. However, Shabbos, now the Mishnah doesn't have to say that if it wasn't cooked before Shabbos, you can't cook it. No, the Mishnah here is not telling you the Isser Bishul. The Mishnah is telling you a chiddush that even though something was not cooked from before Shabbos, we are allowed to rinse it with hot water on Shabbos. Two dinim. Number one is you may not soak it, not even in a klei sheni. When it comes to rinsing it, there's a big debate here in the Rishonim. Can you rinse it only with waters from a klei sheni, or can you rinse it even with waters of a klei rishon? Because hadacha, even from a klei rishon, won't affect it. I want to go back just to one thing over here. That when the Mishnah began, that anything that was already baba chamen me'erev Shabbos, shoyden oisa b'chamen, does not mean that you can put it back in a pot on the fire, that we learned a whole Perek about chazor, that's asur. What it means is, since it was cooked from before Shabbos, you can put it in a clay rishon that's off the fire. Okay, good. At least we have to one detail. Now, let's go back to. So now this leniency of rinsing off something that was not pre-cooked, and maybe even with waters from a clay rishon, is not true universally. It's true, but the exception is chutz min hamoliach hayashim. In other words, aged salted fish, a little bit of rinsing with hot water, excuse me, will already make it cooked. That's the way you cook it. That's an act of bishul. And also a certain fish called Julius or Hispanin, Spanish mackerel. That helps you. That's a fish that's so delicate and it gets cooked so easily. Shahad Hassan is the Gemara Malachtan. The Gemara Malachtan is not Gemara Malacha for Tikkun Keli. It means it's an act of bishul. Okay. So first of all, when we're speaking about taking something that was pre-cooked, and the Mishnah is saying that not on fire, but even in a kli rishon, you can put it on a kli rishon and keep going my. What would be the purpose? It's cooked already. Amar Rav Safra, you're going to go to the Rabbi. Rabbi was right to Amoida in Eretz Yisrael, and here for therapeutic reasons, he would have in Yiddish yoach. He would have soup, not stam soup. He would have soup that the chicken was dissolved in it. So that was something, that's just an example of something that even though you're adding benefit, you're cooking it and it's going to dissolve. You are allowed to do that because it was already cooked from before Shabbos and ein bishul, acha bishul, as long as you do not put it back on the fire. Now that we mentioned, we're going to, right now, you're going to think, oh, we're going to start schwitzing, klei rishon, klei sheni, nothing, garnished. We mentioned this food that Rav Abba ate. Let's speak about foods. I once went to Rav Abba's house. This is Cheved in Eretz Yisrael. And he gave us that special broth. I'm reading the Gemara. If Rav Abba also did not have on the table not good wine, amazing wine, 3-year-old wine, that to wash down that soup is not say I would have vomited out that soup. It was disgusting. So he made a comment about the food that people eat in Eretz Yisrael. So now we're going to start having this whole conversation. Yeah, you think that the food that people eat in Eretz Yisrael might not be a geschmack, the opposite. Let's go to the Kutach. Rabbi Yechanan, right, the great leader in Eretz Yisrael, he was so disgusted by the food called kutach. It was a dip that was made out of moldy bread, sour milk, and other rotten stuff. And in a bubble, it was a big delicacy. And yeah, you think that Rabbi Abba soup is disgusting? What about the kutach? Rabbi Yechanan roik mi kutach devavloi. When he would just think about it, his body became so revolted that he would have to spit up. Now you should know, Kalal, sometimes if I don't like your food, you know why I don't like your food? Because I don't like you. And I understand the Hemshech HaGemara, the whole Hemshech now will be that that's not the case. Rabbi Yechanan, Dafka Rabbi Yechanan, we should just lift to get there, Mir Hashem. He had the biggest kavod for the Yidden and Bavel, but their food he couldn't take. Now I want to make a suggestion. The reason why he would spit up from the kutach, this is Tanya Perek Chav Zayin, if you remember the whole sugya of Simcha, is that Alter Rebbe writes there's two types of foods. There's macholam arevim, and then you have foods that are spicy. And the Alter Rebbe is explaining it that there's the tzaddik, sweet, and then the nachas that the Eibishter has from us, that we are not sweet, that we have a yetzer hara, and we, prava, iskafia, that gives God the greatest nachas. The Alter Rebbe compares it to these moldy bread means that the Yidden and Bavel, they were not tzaddikim. So for them, they transformed something moldy into a food. For Yidden and Bavel, that was great. But Rabbi Yechanan was again avoid of a tzaddik. For a tzaddik, no, you want to have something sweet. Okay, gewalt. Of the nisht, but good. I'm sitting over here, I get to say that. So now, says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yosef, when he heard how revolted Rabbi Yechanan was from our kutach, Rabbi Yosef was from Bavel. So he says, you know what? He spit up. I spit up from Rabba's broth. They also have food that's not so good. And don't tell me that everyone in Eretz Yisrael doesn't like our kutach. I want you to know that Amar Rav Gaza, I once went to Eretz Yisrael from Babel. And, he traveled with this kutach. Either I came with it, I prepared it over there. And you know what? Everyone loved it. All the sick people, Rabbi Yochanan would say, if you're sick, you'll enjoy it. That goes with the Tanya. Well, sick meaning beruchnius. In Eretz Yisrael, when everyone was a tzaddik, those who are sick, a sick person likes the avoid of tshuva. The avoid of tshuva is kutach. Okay, we're far from done yet. So the Mishnah says that if something was not babamayim, madichin bamayim, according to some of the shayim, mayim from a clay shayin, but not the old fish and the Spanish mackerel. So what happens? First of all, so Amar Rabbi Yosef, mamash chayv chatas, because rinsing off these delicate foods with hot water fully cooks them. Our Mishnah, chutz memiliach yoshan, the kol yasoi ispanim, shahad Hassan, quoting our Mishnah, Zui Gmar Malachtan is Araya Shmamino Vretstaka also Dorais. Now we begin this whole Agadata. And all connected to the Chetzonius, the Spanish mackerel. I think it's connected just to make a point that Rabbi Yochanan, who was disgusted by the Kutach, loved the Yidden. Maybe that's why there's a link also. It says Yosef, Rabbi Chia bar Abba, and Avasi. Halkop, two Amariroim. They are sitting in front of Rabbi Yochanan. The Yosef Rabbi Yochanan will come and name them. And at that moment, Rabbi Yochanan is dozing off. Don't think because he's dozing off, he's not paying attention. Rabbi Yochanan, in his dozing off, is paying attention more than everyone else. But they're having a conversation in front of their dozed off Rebbe. He asked them 4 questions. Obviously, this is a deep Gemara, but let's at least read the Chetzonius. Why are the birds in Babel fatter than the birds of Eretz Yisrael? Eretz Yisrael is the Eretz. Everything in Eretz Yisrael is better. Why is it better there? Amalei, he says, I negate your premise. Who said that the oifas in Babel is fatter? Eretz Yisrael has the best birds. You have to know where to look. Where do you go? Go to Gaza. Talech lamidbar Aza. Aza is Eretz Yisrael, and Va'arecha or Va'arech, and I'll show you that Shemeina Mehem. No, in other words, he. The question is not a kasha. No, question number 2. This is all Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Why is it that in Babel, for some reason, it feels like that a Yom Tov in Babel is more freilach? So he answered him, interesting, you're right, but again, it doesn't speak to the greatness. Eretz Yisrael, everything is the best in Eretz Yisrael. In Babel, people are poor. So Rashi says, therefore, listen to these words. They don't have any simcha. They don't have good food. They don't have good drink. They don't have rest from work. So when you take a poor person that is never muchet and you give him a day off, he feels greater joy. But it's not because he has more joy on Yom Tov. It's because he has no life. Much better in Eretz Yisrael. God, there's more bracha. There's more this. So the contrast is not that great. Question number 3. I know that when I was in Cheder, Mitsuyin means you got 100 plus. Mitsuyin means great. Mitsuyin here means that they dressed fancy. The Chachamim in Babel, look today in an Americana so-called Rabbi, he gave me a schnips, he gave me a jacket. He dresses keilu fancy. And in Eretz Yisrael, the leaders dress simple. So he says that doesn't speak about the greatness of Babel. Since the people in Babel are not b'nei Torah, says Rashi, and therefore they won't be machabed the Talmud Chacham, and it's important for the Rav to get covered, not for him, but for his Torah. So the only way you can get people to be machabed him is by wearing fancy clothing. In Eretz Yisrael, people are much deeper. They don't give covet based on what you're wearing, and they're machabed you for your Torah. There's no need to wear fancy clothing. And then the 4th, why are goyim mizuham? It means impure. Now this is some sort of ruchnistic impurity that also manifests with a bad body odor. Why is that so? Because they eat shkatzim v'ramasim that have this effect that they are both beruchnius and begashmius, and now with corona, that these types of foods, they bring about all types of zihum. Okay, so that was the 4 questions, the 4 answers. And the Vaila, so to say, wakes up. Not that he was sleeping that deeply. And Amar Lahu, when he tells them, this is so beautiful, kinderlach. When someone tells you kinderlach, what he's telling you is that you're a child, meaning you don't know what you're talking about. Didn't I already tell you? And he quotes a pasuk from Shlomo HaMelech that a person should tell Chachma, you are my sister. What does that mean? Tell Chachma you are my sister. Sefer Yetzirah, right? Havein b'chacham, havein b'chachma v'chakein b'vina. Achoisi is bina, and there's a whole thing of figuring out how to go in between and bring chachma bina, bina chachma, chachma bina. That's how you get to the emes. But the alpi nigla, what's that? You tell to chachma you're my sister. That means that only im baru l'cha davar ka'as choischa. When you are asked a Torah question, everyone knows that a man cannot marry a sister. You know, if you know the answer on other questions, just like you know clear that your sister is asurulach, only then I'm reyu. And you know what? V'im lav, and if you hear a question and you don't know for sure the answer, right? Much better not to know than to give the wrong answer. Is like reyu. In under the veter, he rejected all of the answers. So so fine. So both of the Talmidim tell Rabbi Yechanan, good. So now the Leima Lon Mar Ezemem tell us some of these answers. So the Rabbi Yechanan does. The reason, yes, the birds and bubble are fatter. They're better. But there's a reason for that. They never went into exile. As it says, a pasuk in Yirmiyahu, that Sha'an non Moav min Urav. Moav, the nation of Moav, they have been at peace. They have lived in tranquility from when they were young. Right? El Shemarim, it rests quietly on its Shemarim, like a bottle of wine. If you never move it, the aroma will be better, the taste will be better. Moving it around ruins it. Why is Moav azoi good? Because uvagoyla loy halach, which implies that if a nation goes into Golus, Golus has a negative effect. Now, we're speaking about animals. In other words, what Rabbi Yechanan was saying is that when the Yidden were exiled, we're speaking here about Golus Bayis Rishon, that was the first big exile. Part of that Golus was that all of the animals and all of the birds, all of them left Israel. So even though they returned, they were not the same. Oh. And V'hachim in all in the Golus, how do you know that the birds went into Golus? We know that the Yidden went into Golus. Says the Gemara de Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, for 52 years, there was no Ish in Yehuda. As it says, this is about Churban Bayis Rishon, that Al Heharim Esa B'chivonei, that upon the hills, we're speaking about the hills of Yerushalayim, the hills of Yehuda, I will raise up weeping and wailing. But from what? Not just because of the people. Because everything was sent into Golus. Now Rashi here, around 10 lines before the end of by the narrow lines, Nun Beishana, makes a cheshbon that from the days of Tzidkiyahu until the Eden, during the lifetime of Kuresh, began to build the second Beis HaMikdash, which was 18 years before they actually did it. Around 52 and 18 is 70. And we were talking Golus for 70 years. But the last 18 years, Yidden were already in Yerushalayim and Yehuda. But for the first 52 years, especially after Gedalia ben Achikam, after that tragedy, there were no Yidden there. Oh, which is interesting, which would mean that the birds of Gaza, let's put them together, maybe they didn't go into Golus, which is why they were Shemainim. But in other words, they are not great because they went into Golus. Now we're going to connect it to our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yechanan. Rabbi Yechanan didn't say it this shmuz, but he said it in another time, that Kulam Chazru, they all came back now. They have to be nurtured to go back to the former glory. But you should know, Chutz Mikol Yesu Aspanim, but there was one creature, everything went into Golus that never returned. And this Spanish mackerel never returned. And why is that? Listen to this word. Amarav, Hane Madari de Bavel, slopes of Bavel. Mahadri Mayala Ein Eitam. As Rashi writes the first line in the white lines, there are secretive underground channels. that bring the waters of the Euphrates all the way to Eretz Yisrael. And we're going to learn this in Yuma, that there is a spring of water called the Ein Eitam, or Ein Eitam. And that water was 23 amas taller than Harabayas, which is why when they had a mikvah for the Kohen Gadol, as we'll be learning, and we learned this in Talmud and in Midrash, that the source of the spring water came from this Ein Eitam. Where did these waters come from? They came from Babel, which means these waters have to go upstream, and it works. Now, all of the fish that got exiled, when the Yidden went into exile, they returned to Israel. How? Through this stream. But they have to swim upstream. They have to go upwards. And this Spanish mackerel, this fish alarm, since the backbone is not strong enough, was unable to go up. And that's the big lesson in life. Going down is easy. The avoid of going up, you need a backbone. And that's why this fish is not found in Eretz Yisrael. So that's already one link. And again, we'll see soon how through Rabbi Yechanan's other answers that he had the greatest covet for the Yidden and Babel. Much more. And he explains why they wore fancy clothing. Not because they are B'nai Torah, but the kutach is nicht good. In other words, Rabbi Yechanan was avoid of a tzaddik. And kutach, which is taking mold and taking something rotten and making it into something good, that's something that's shaykh to a person that has rotten and mold. That's most of us. And even us, we should know that we can transform it into as a tasty food that Hashem has nachas from our avoida, from the avoida of Iskafia, to be continued. Good stuff. I thought we'll finish until the Mishnah, but we got ahead.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
Rabbi, can you clarify on this? We're talking about this is the sugya of ein bishlach habishul, right? So when it's talking about the mackerel, right? We're talking about the mackerel pouring hot water over it. We're saying, I thought it's if already cooked, then you can't even rinse it.
No. Look, read the Mishnah. No, it's something, even something that was not baba mayim, and therefore you're not allowed to soak it. And Danny, according to many Rishonim, you can soak it in a klei sheni.
Because
that's the whole klei sheni. Midrabanan, right? You can't soak it, but you can be madiach it irui from klei rishon, because an irui of klei rishon will not cook it. However, these two fishes are so delicate that irui will cook it. So that's why it's also midoraisa.
Shabbos, thank you. Have a good Shabbos.
Rabbi, I think the overcooked chicken is what the Sfardim make. They call it tabit. This is the chicken soup of Rav Abba. I think that's what it is.
My mother also made it. I don't need to Sfardim. Good. Delicious.
Shabbos.
Delicious.
Shabbos.